The morning Thomas Quinn opened his eyes to find a woman sleeping in the corner of his bunkhouse with a bullet wound in her shoulder. He figured his already purposeless life had just gotten considerably more complicated. It was June of 1878, and Thomas had been drifting through Eureka, California, for 3 months without much reason beyond the fact that stopping required less effort than moving on. At 32 years old, he had worked cattle drives from Texas to Montana, had seen men die over card games and honor, had loved a woman once who married his brother instead, and had gradually surrendered to the understanding that his life was a stream flowing nowhere in particular. He woke each day, worked enough to eat and drink, and went to sleep expecting nothing different when the sun rose again. Purpose was for other men, men who believed the world owed them something or that they owed the world. Thomas believed in neither. But this woman bleeding quietly in the corner of his rented room was going to change all that, though he did not know it yet. She was young, maybe 23 or 24, with dark hair matted against her forehead and skin too pale beneath the grime and blood. Her dress was torn, the fabric once a respectable blue calico now stained and shredded. Someone had shot her, and recently, given the fresh blood still seeping through the makeshift bandage she had tied herself. She must have broken in through his window during the night. Thomas sat up slowly, his hand instinctively moving toward the revolver he kept under his pillow. Her eyes snapped open before he touched the gun. They were brown, he noticed, a deep brown that held both fear and defiance in equal measure. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracked and dry. "Please do not turn me in. They will hang me." Thomas paused, studying her. He had seen plenty of wanted criminals in his years, and this woman did not fit the mold. Her hands, though dirty, were small and uncalloused. Her face, beneath the dirt and pain, held an educated refinement that spoke of better circumstances. "Who shot you?" he asked, his voice rough from sleep. "Does it matter? Will you help me or not? Depends on what you did." She closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, something had shifted. The defiance remained, but the fear had transformed into resignation. "I killed a man, but he deserved killing, and I would do it again." Thomas swung his legs out of bed, pulling on his pants and boots with practiced efficiency. Dawn light was beginning to filter through the single window, painting everything in shades of gray and gold. He could hear the town starting to wake outside, the distant sound of a rooster, footsteps on the wooden sidewalk, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer already beginning its daily rhythm. "Who was he?" Thomas asked, moving toward her slowly so as not to spook her further. "My husband." Her voice was steady now, almost cold. "Nathan Tucker. He owned the dry goods store on Main Street. To everyone in this town, he was a fine, upstanding citizen. To me, he was a monster who thought his wedding ring gave him the right to use me however he pleased." The name meant nothing to Thomas. He had been in Eureka long enough to know the basics, but had made no effort to integrate himself into the community. He bought his supplies, worked odd jobs at the local ranches, and kept to himself. Now he wished he had paid more attention. "And the law sees it different, I take it," he said, kneeling beside her to examine the wound. She flinched but did not pull away. "Sheriff Dalton was Nathan's friend. They played cards every Thursday. When I shot Nathan yesterday evening, I ran. I heard Dalton shouting that he would see me hanged by sunset today. He has men searching everywhere." She looked at him directly, her brown eyes boring into his. "I climbed through your window because it was the only one with a broken latch. I am sorry for intruding. If you want me to leave, I will. But I cannot go back out there. Not yet." Thomas had spent 3 decades learning not to care about other people's problems. Caring led to disappointment or worse, to obligation. He had built his purposeless life carefully, brick by brick of indifference and whiskey. This woman represented everything he had been avoiding: complications, consequences, a reason to do something other than exist. He should turn her in. Or at the very least, he should throw her out and wash his hands of the whole affair. Instead, he found himself saying, "Let me look at that shoulder." Her name was Naomi Tucker, and as Thomas cleaned and properly bandaged her wound using his meager medical supplies and some whiskey for sterilization, she told him her story. She spoke quietly but clearly, her voice never wavering even when he had to dig out fragments of fabric embedded in the bullet wound. She had married Nathan Tucker 2 years ago when she was 22, a new arrival to Eureka from Sacramento where her father had worked as a clerk before dying of pneumonia. Her mother had passed when Naomi was young. With no family and few prospects, Nathan's courtship had seemed like providence. He was 15 years her senior, established, respected. The wedding had been the social event of the season. The first time he hit her was 3 days after their wedding. She had overcooked the roast. The second time was a week later because she had smiled too warmly at a customer in the store. The beatings became routine, unpredictable, tied to offenses both real and imagined. She learned to move quietly to anticipate his moods to make herself small and unobtrusive. "Why not leave?" Thomas asked, though he kept his voice neutral, non-judgmental. He had seen enough of the world to know the question was more complicated than it sounded. "And go where? With what money? I thought about it every day." She drew a sharp breath as he tied off the bandage. "I told myself if I could just be better, quieter, more perfect, it would stop." That is what women tell themselves, is it not? That somehow it is our fault, our failure. "That is what men like your husband want women to think," Thomas said. He sat back on his heels, examining his work. The wound was clean now, properly dressed. She would likely live if infection did not set in. "What changed yesterday?" Naomi was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different, harder. "He came home drunk. That was not unusual. But this time, he had his revolver and he was waving it around, shouting about how I had embarrassed him. Someone had told him they saw me talking to the banker's son outside the mercantile. I had been asking directions, nothing more, but Nathan was convinced I was unfaithful." She looked at her hands, which were trembling slightly. "He pointed the gun at me, said he should kill me, save himself the humiliation of having an unfaithful wife. I do not think he meant to do it, not really. Nathan liked the threat more than the execution. He liked watching me beg. But I was so tired, 24 years old and so very tired of being afraid." "So you took the gun," Thomas said. He set it down on the table when he went to pour another drink. "I picked it up. My hands were shaking, but I pointed it at him and told him I was leaving. He laughed, actually laughed." Her voice broke slightly, the first crack in her composure. "He told me I did not have the courage, that I was weak, pathetic. He started walking toward me, and I knew if he got close enough to take the gun back, he would beat me worse than he ever had before. So I pulled the trigger." Thomas stood and moved to the window, looking out at the street below. Early morning shoppers were beginning to emerge, women in bonnets and men in work clothes starting their daily routines. Normal people living normal lives, unaware of the drama unfolding in his small rented room. "He went down, but he was not dead yet," Naomi continued. "He was on the floor, bleeding, looking up at me with such surprise, like he could not believe I had actually done it, and then he reached for his ankle where he kept another gun, so I shot him again. And that time he stopped moving." Thomas turned back to face her. "Where did you get shot?" I panicked after. Ran out into the street without thinking. Sheriff Dalton was coming toward the store, must have heard the shots. When he saw me with the gun, he drew his own and fired. hit my shoulder. I dropped the gun and ran. I knew the alleys better than he did because I used to walk them late at night when Nathan was passed out drunk and I needed air. I hid until dark, then broke into your room. Lucky for you, I am a heavy sleeper, Thomas said, and that I was drinking at the saloon until late. Lucky for me you did not shoot me on sight, Naomi replied. She tried to smile, but the expression turned into a grimace of pain. What will you do now? Turn me in? It was a fair question. The sensible answer was yes. Thomas had no stake in this woman's fate. Her problems were not his problems. In a few hours, when they found her, he could claim he had been at the saloon the whole time and knew nothing about any wounded woman in his room. But something had shifted in him while she told her story. Maybe it was the way she had described being tired, because Thomas understood bone-deep exhaustion with life. Maybe it was the memory of his own mother, who had endured his father's fists with the same quiet resignation Naomi had described. Or maybe, in the secret places of his heart that he usually kept locked away, Thomas was tired of purposeless mornings and empty days. "Can you ride?" he asked. Hope flickered across her face. "I think so, if I must. Then we leave before full daylight. I have a horse at the livery. We will take him and head east into the mountains. Dalton will search the roads first, but the high country has 1,000 places to hide. There is an old mining cabin I know about, maybe 2 hours' ride. We can hole up there while you heal and figure out what comes next. Why are you helping me?" Naomi asked, and the question was genuine, bewildered. "You do not know me. This is not your fight." Thomas looked at her for a long moment, this wounded woman who had killed to save her own life and now faced a noose for the crime of self-preservation. He thought about all the years he had spent drifting, all the mornings he had woken without purpose or direction, all the times he had told himself that caring was for fools and romantics. "Maybe I am tired too," he said finally. "Now, can you stand?" Getting Naomi dressed in some of Thomas's spare clothes and out of the boarding house without being seen required more luck than planning. The landlady, Mrs. Morrison, was half-deaf and usually slept until 7, which gave them a window. Thomas bundled Naomi's torn dress and bloodied bandages into his saddlebag, then helped her down the back stairs, his arm around her waist to keep her steady. The pre-dawn air was cool and fresh, scented with pine from the surrounding mountains. Eureka sat in a valley, surrounded by the rugged peaks of Northern California, a gold rush town that had evolved into something more permanent. The streets were wide and muddy, lined with false-fronted buildings that promised more grandeur than they delivered. At this hour, the town was mostly quiet, just a few early risers and the persistent sounds of livestock and industry. Thomas's horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Rusty, was exactly where he had left him at Morrison's small stable behind the boarding house. The animal nickered softly as Thomas saddled him with practiced efficiency, occasionally glancing at Naomi, who leaned against the stable wall, her face pale but determined. "Can you mount?" he asked, leading Rusty out. "I can do what I must," she replied, and proved it by pulling herself into the saddle despite the obvious pain it caused her shoulder. She bit her lip hard enough to draw blood but made no sound. Thomas swung up behind her, reaching around to take the reins. Having her pressed against him felt strange and intimate, but there was no help for it. They needed to move as one unit if they were going to get out of town without attracting attention. They walked Rusty slowly through the back streets, staying away from Main Street where the sheriff's office sat. Thomas knew a route that skirted the edge of town, passing behind the Chinese laundry and the tannery before joining the Eastern Road. No one stopped them. No one even looked at them twice. Just another cowboy heading out for a day's work, nothing remarkable about it. It was not until they were a good mile outside town, climbing into the foothills where pine and oak began to crowd the trail, that Thomas felt Naomi start to relax against him. Her breathing was steady but shallow, and he could feel the heat radiating from her wounded shoulder even through the layers of clothing. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I have been better, but I have been worse too." She shifted slightly, trying to find a more comfortable position. "Where exactly is this cabin?" "Up near Big Bear Creek. An old prospector named Daniel Quinn built it back in the 50s. He was my uncle. Never found much gold, but he loved the solitude. Died about 5 years back. The cabin has been empty since, but it is solid enough. Water, shelter, far from prying eyes. Your uncle," Naomi said. "So you have family here?" "Had. Uncle Daniel was the last of them in California. My parents are dead. Brother is in Colorado with his wife and children. We do not speak." "Why not?" Thomas was quiet for a moment, guiding Rusty around a fallen log. The trail was getting narrower, steeper. "Because he married the woman I loved and I could not forgive him for it. Or maybe I could not forgive her, or myself. It has been long enough that I do not remember who I am angry at anymore." "That sounds lonely," Naomi said softly. "It is. But lonely is safe. Lonely does not disappoint you." They rode in silence after that, climbing higher into the mountains. The sun rose fully, painting the landscape in shades of gold and green. Birds sang in the trees, and somewhere in the distance, Thomas could hear the rush of water over rocks. The world was beautiful and indifferent, exactly as it had always been. The cabin appeared around mid-morning, exactly as Thomas remembered it. It sat in a small clearing beside Big Bear Creek, a structure of rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney and a roof that sagged only slightly. The windows were intact, protected by wooden shutters, and the door hung straight on its hinges. Uncle Daniel had built things to last. Thomas helped Naomi down from the horse, then tied Rusty to a nearby tree where the animal could graze and drink from the creek. The cabin door was unlocked, because nobody bothered to steal from the dead this far into the wilderness. Inside, the cabin was musty but dry. A single room with a stone fireplace, a rough table and 2 chairs, a bed frame with a straw mattress that mice had probably nested in, and shelves that had once held supplies now sitting empty. Dust covered everything, but the structure was sound. "Home sweet home," Thomas said, trying for levity and failing. Naomi moved to the bed and sat carefully, her face gray with exhaustion and pain. "It is perfect, thank you." Thomas spent the next hour making the place livable. He cleared out the mouse nests, swept the floor, got a fire going in the hearth. He checked his saddlebags for supplies and found them wanting. Some jerky, a little coffee, a half loaf of bread. Not nearly enough. "I need to go back to town," he said finally, watching Naomi from across the room. She had laid down on the bed, her eyes closed. "We need proper food, medicine, blankets, everything." Her eyes opened, fear flickering in them. "What if they catch you? What if they ask questions?" "I will be careful. Say I am heading out for prospecting work, stocking up for a few weeks in the hills. Happens all the time. Nobody will think twice." He paused. "But you need to stay hidden. Do not go outside, do not make noise. If anyone comes by, which they will not, you hide. Understood?" "I understand." She looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. Gratitude, certainly, but something else too. Something that made his chest feel tight. "Thomas, why are you really doing this?" He should have had an answer ready, something casual and deflective. Instead, he found himself telling the truth. "Because this morning, when I woke up and saw you there, it was the first time in years I felt like maybe there was a reason to get out of bed. I do not know what that means yet, but I know I am not ready to let you hang." Naomi did not reply, but something passed between them in the silence, an understanding that went deeper than words. Thomas rode back to Erica with a careful story prepared and a face that revealed nothing. The general store was busy when he arrived, full of housewives and workers. He took his time, selecting supplies without rushing: flour, beans, salt pork, coffee, sugar, a bottle of laudanum for pain, clean bandages, a wool blanket, cooking oil, matches. He added a spare shirt and a simple dress, trying to estimate Naomi's size without being obvious about it. The clerk, a balding man named Walter, rang up the purchases without comment until he got to the dress. "Got yourself a lady friend, Quinn?" Walter asked with a knowing grin. "A man can hope," Thomas replied easily. "There is a widow woman up near the Jackson place. Thought I might call on her." "Good luck with that. Heard she is particular." Thomas paid in cash, loaded everything onto Rusty, and was about to leave when he heard raised voices from outside. Moving to the window, he saw Sheriff Dalton standing in the street with two deputies, talking to a small crowd that had gathered. "Tucker's wife is a murderer and a fugitive," Dalton was saying, his voice carrying across the street. "Shot her husband in cold blood and ran. Anyone harboring her will face charges as an accessory. There is a $50 reward for information leading to her capture." Thomas felt his jaw tighten. $50 was enough to make people talk, enough to make them look twice at strangers buying extra supplies. "Think she is still in town?" someone in the crowd asked. "Doubtful. We have searched every building." "My guess is she got out during the night, maybe on foot. She is wounded, bleeding, cannot have gotten far. We will find her." Thomas waited until the crowd dispersed before leaving the store, keeping his movements casual and unhurried. No one stopped him. No one even looked at him. He was invisible, the way he had always preferred to be. But riding back up into the mountains, Thomas felt the weight of the choice he had made settling onto his shoulders. He was now an accessory to murder, harboring a fugitive, lying to the law. If caught, he would hang beside Naomi. The strange thing was, he did not regret it. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Thomas Quinn felt alive. When he returned to the cabin, he found Naomi awake and sitting by the fire she had somehow managed to build up. Her face was flushed with fever, and her movements were slow and careful, but her eyes were clear. "I thought you might not come back," she said as he entered, his arms full of supplies. "I gave my word. People break their word all the time." Thomas set the supplies on the table and began unpacking. "I am not people." Over the next few days, they fell into a rhythm. Thomas would hunt in the mornings, bringing back rabbits or squirrels or occasionally a grouse. Naomi, despite her injury, insisted on helping with the cooking and cleaning. Her fever came and went, and Thomas changed her bandages twice a day, cleaning the wound with boiled water and a little of the precious laudanum to manage the pain. They talked more than Thomas had talked to anyone in years. Naomi told him about growing up in Sacramento, about her mother who had loved poetry and her father who had been kind but distant. She talked about her dreams of becoming a teacher before circumstances had forced her into marriage instead. She had a sharp mind and a sharper wit, and Thomas found himself looking forward to their conversations almost as much as he dreaded them. Because the more he knew about Naomi Tucker, the harder it became to maintain the careful distance he had built around his heart. One evening, about a week into their hidden existence, they sat by the fire after dinner. Rain drummed on the roof, and the cabin felt warm and secure, a small bubble of safety in a dangerous world. "Tell me about the woman," Naomi said suddenly. "The one your brother married." Thomas had been whittling a piece of wood, not making anything in particular, just keeping his hands busy. He stopped, the knife still in his hand. "Why?" "Because you mentioned her, and then never spoke of her again. Because I think she is part of why you live the way you do. Because I want to understand you. He could have deflected, changed the subject, built up his walls again. Instead, he found himself talking. Her name was Elizabeth. Elizabeth Marsh. I met her in Denver when I was 25. She was 19, the daughter of a banker, completely out of my league. But somehow she saw something in me. We courted for 6 months, and I was sure I would marry her. What happened? My brother happened. Jack came to visit, and he was always the charming one, the successful one. He had a ranch in Colorado, money, prospects. Everything I did not have. Elizabeth and I had a fight about something stupid, I do not even remember what. I left town for a week to cool off. When I came back, Jack and Elizabeth were engaged. Naomi was quiet for a moment. Did they love each other? Or was it about security for her? I think they did. That was the worst part. If it had been about money or convenience, I could have hated them both and moved on. But they were genuinely happy together. Still are, from what I hear. 3 children now. Jack writes sometimes. I do not write back. That must have hurt terribly. It did. For a long time. Thomas resumed whittling, the knife moving in small, precise strokes. But eventually the hurt turned into something else. Numbness, maybe. Indifference. I stopped seeing the point of trying, of wanting things, of hoping. I just existed one day after another. Until now, Naomi said softly. Thomas looked up at her. The firelight painted her face in warm tones, highlighting the curve of her cheek, the depth of her eyes. She had been beautiful, even dirty and wounded that first morning. Now, cleaned up and healing, she was stunning. Until now, he agreed. The rain continued through the night, and Thomas gave Naomi the bed while he made a pallet on the floor near the fire. He lay awake for a long time, listening to her breathing, trying to understand what was happening to him. He had helped her because it was the right thing to do, or so he told himself. But it was becoming something more, something that terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. Naomi made him want to be more than he was, to believe in more than he had allowed himself to believe in years. And that was dangerous, because women like Naomi did not end up with men like him. Even if they somehow escaped the law, even if they managed to build a new life somewhere far from Eureka and Sheriff Dalton and the ghost of Nathan Tucker, what kind of life could he offer her? He was a drifter with no prospects and a talent for avoiding responsibility. But as he finally drifted off to sleep, Thomas allowed himself to imagine it anyway. A small ranch, maybe. A few head of cattle. Naomi teaching local children their letters and numbers. A life that meant something. It was a beautiful dream. In the morning, everything changed. Thomas woke to Rusty's warning whinny and the sound of hoofbeats approaching the cabin. He was on his feet instantly, his revolver in hand, moving to the window. 3 riders were coming up the trail, and even from a distance, he could see the glint of a sheriff's badge on the lead rider's chest. Naomi, hide. Now. His voice was low and urgent. She was already moving, pulling herself into the small space under the bed, despite the pain it must have caused her shoulder. Thomas kicked dirt over the second set of tracks by the fireplace and arranged the supplies to look like a lone man's camp. Then he tucked his gun into his belt, hidden under his shirt, and stepped outside to greet their visitors. Sheriff Dalton was in his late 40s, thick around the middle but with the hard eyes of a man who had seen violence and dealt it out in equal measure. His deputies flanked him, both young and nervous-looking. "Help you, Sheriff?" Thomas asked, leaning against the cabin door frame with studied casualness. "Thomas Quinn, is it? The prospector?" Dalton's voice was gravely suspicious. "That is right. Something wrong. We are looking for a woman." "Naomi Tucker. Murdered her husband about 10 days ago. Last tracks we found led east into these hills. You see anyone out here?" Thomas scratched his jaw, pretending to think. "Have not seen a soul. Been working a claim up the creek, keeping to myself mostly." "Woman, you said?" Seems an odd place for a woman to run. Dalton studied him, and Thomas could feel the scrutiny like a physical thing. Mind if we look inside your cabin? Would it matter if I minded? Not particularly. Thomas stepped aside, his heart hammering but his face calm. Dalton dismounted and moved past him into the cabin, his eyes scanning everything. The single bed, the supplies, the remains of breakfast for one. Thomas had been careful, but he knew that one mistake, one overlooked detail, could end everything. The sheriff walked slowly around the room, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. He paused by the bed and Thomas felt his breath catch. But Dalton only glanced at it before moving to the fireplace, examining the cold ashes from the morning fire. Living rough out here, Dalton observed. That is the prospecting life. Find any color? Not yet. But Uncle Daniel always said this creek had promise. Figure I owe it to his memory to give it a proper try. Dalton grunted, still looking around. One of the deputies poked his head in. No tracks around back, Sheriff. Just the one horse. Check the perimeter anyway. Look for signs of a second camp. The deputies moved off and Dalton turned back to Thomas. This Tucker woman, she is dangerous. Shot her husband twice. Once might be passion, but twice means intent. She is wounded too, probably desperate. If you do see her, you send word immediately. Understood. Understood, Thomas said evenly. $50 reward still stands. That is a lot of money for a man working a played-out claim. I will keep my eyes open. Dalton stared at him for another long moment, then nodded. See that you do. And Quinn, you are new to these parts, so maybe you do not know how things work. Eureka is a civilized town. We do not take kindly to lawlessness or to people who aid criminals. Justice is swift here. I will keep that in mind, Sheriff. Dalton finally left, mounting his horse and waiting while his deputies finished their search. Thomas stood in the doorway, watching, forcing himself to appear unconcerned. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the three men rode back down the trail, disappearing into the trees. Thomas waited until he could no longer hear hoofbeats before going back inside and locking the door. They are gone. Naomi crawled out from under the bed, her face pale and her shoulder bleeding again from the strain. That was too close. Too close, Thomas agreed, helping her back onto the bed. But they did not find you. They will be back, or others will come. Thomas, you cannot keep hiding me. Eventually someone will figure it out. So what do you suggest? Naomi looked at him and he saw the steel in her eyes, the same steel that had allowed her to pull the trigger and save her own life. We run. Really run. Leave California, go somewhere they will not follow. Oregon, maybe, or Nevada. Somewhere I can be someone else. You would have to change your name, your whole identity, never come back. What is there to come back to? A grave beside a man I hated. A town that wants to hang me. I have nothing here, Thomas. Nothing but you. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Thomas felt something crack in his chest, some wall he had maintained for so long it had become part of his structure. We would need money, he said slowly. Supplies for a long journey, stake to start over wherever we end up. I have money. Nathan kept our savings in a strong box under our bed. $400, maybe more. I know where he hid the key. That money is in your house, in town, with the sheriff probably watching for you to do exactly this. Then we take it at night. The house has been empty since Nathan died. They are not guarding it every hour of every day. We slip in, get the money, and leave. We could be across the border into Oregon within 3 days if we ride hard. It was insane. It was dangerous. It was exactly the kind of complication Thomas had spent a decade avoiding. When? He heard himself ask. Tonight. Before they search the high country again and get luckier than they did today. Thomas wanted to argue, to point out all the ways this could go wrong. But looking at Naomi, seeing the hope and determination in her face, he found he could not. Somewhere in the last 10 days, her purpose had become his purpose. Her survival had become the first thing he had cared about in years. Tonight, he agreed. But we do this smart. We plan every step. And if anything goes wrong, you run. Promise me that. I promise if you promise the same. Deal. They spent the afternoon planning. Thomas rode down partway to scout the terrain and memorize the route. The house where Naomi had lived with Nathan Tucker sat on the edge of town, which was both good and bad. Good because it was easier to approach unseen. Bad because it was more exposed once they were there. The plan was simple. They would wait until after midnight when the town was asleep. Naomi would go in through the back door while Thomas kept watch. She would retrieve the money and anything else small and valuable enough to carry. They would be in and out in under 10 minutes, then ride hard for the Oregon border. Simple plans were best, Thomas knew. Simple plans had fewer places to go wrong, but he also knew that even the best plans rarely survived contact with reality. Night fell and they waited. Thomas checked his revolver 3 times, made sure Rusty was rested and ready. Naomi changed into darker clothes and tied her hair back. Her shoulder was still painful, but she moved with determination that overrode physical discomfort. "Are you scared?" she asked as they prepared to leave. "Terrified," Thomas admitted. "You, more afraid of hanging than of getting caught tonight. If something happens and we get separated, ride north. There is a town called Hornbrook right on the Oregon border. Meet me there at the hotel. Wait 3 days. If I do not show up by then, keep going and do not look back." "Thomas, promise me." "I promise." They rode down from the cabin under a quarter moon, the darkness both a blessing and a curse. It hid them but also made the terrain treacherous. Thomas let Rusty pick his way carefully, trusting the horse's instincts. Eureka was mostly dark when they arrived, just a few scattered lights from saloons and all-night card games. Dogs barked in the distance, and somewhere someone was playing a mournful tune on a harmonica. Normal sounds of a normal night, unaware of the fugitives moving through the shadows. They left Rusty tied in a grove of trees about a quarter mile from the house and approached on foot. Thomas's heart was hammering so hard he was sure it could be heard streets away, but his hands were steady on his gun. The Tucker house was a modest structure, white clapboard with a small porch and a garden that had already started to go wild with weeds. No lights showed in any windows. No sign of guards or watchers, though that did not mean they were not there. 10 minutes, Thomas whispered. "I will whistle if anyone comes." Naomi nodded and slipped around to the back door. Thomas watched her go, then positioned himself where he could see both the house and the street. The minutes crawled past, each one feeling like an hour. A dog barked somewhere close and Thomas tensed, his hand on his gun. But nothing moved. The street remained empty. 5 minutes. 6. Thomas kept counting in his head, watching the shadows, listening for any sound that did not belong. 8 minutes. 9. Where was she at 11 minutes? Thomas was debating whether to go in after her when he saw movement. But it was not Naomi coming out the back. It was Sheriff Dalton and 2 deputies coming up the front walk, moving with purpose toward the house. Thomas whistled, sharp and clear. Inside the house he heard a crash, then silence. Dalton heard it too and drew his gun, signaling his deputies to spread out. "Come out, Mrs. Tucker. We know you are in there." Thomas had seconds to make a decision. Run and save himself, or try to help Naomi and probably get them both killed. It was not really a choice at all. He stepped out from his hiding place and fired a shot into the air. "Sheriff, she is not alone." Dalton spun toward him, and Thomas saw recognition flash across the lawman's face. "Quinn, I should have known. Drop your weapon." "Not happening, Sheriff. You are going to let her go. You are aiding a murderer, son. That is a hanging offense. She killed a man who was trying to kill her. That is not murder, that is survival. Not for a court to decide, not you." Dalton started moving toward him, and Thomas fired another shot, this time into the dirt at the sheriff's feet. "Next one goes through you," Thomas said, and he meant it. The standoff held for a frozen moment. Then the back door burst open and Naomi ran out, a small bag clutched in her good hand. She saw Thomas and started running toward him. One of the deputies raised his rifle, and Thomas knew with sickening certainty that he was going to shoot Naomi in the back. Thomas fired without thinking, his bullet catching the deputy in the shoulder and spinning him around. All hell broke loose. Dalton returned fire, and Thomas felt something hot and sharp tear across his left arm. He kept moving, grabbing Naomi's hand and pulling her toward the trees where Rusty waited. Behind them, more shots rang out, bullets whipping through the darkness. They reached Rusty in seconds that felt like hours. Thomas threw Naomi onto the horse and vaulted up behind her, kicking the gelding into a gallop before they were fully settled. The horse surged forward, crashing through underbrush and low branches, racing away from the shouting and gunfire. "Are you hit?" Naomi gasped. "Just a graze. You?" "No. Thomas, you shot a deputy. They will never stop hunting us now." "Worry about that later. Right now we ride." They rode through the night, pushing Rusty harder than was safe, putting distance between themselves and Erica. Thomas's arm burned where the bullet had grazed him, and he could feel blood soaking his sleeve, but he ignored it. Behind them he could hear pursuit, voices shouting and more horses. The trail north was rough and steep, climbing into higher mountains where the trees grew thick and the darkness was absolute. More than once, Rusty stumbled on loose rocks, but the horse kept going, driven by fear and Thomas's urgency. Dawn was breaking when they finally stopped to rest in a dense thicket of pine trees. Thomas dismounted and helped Naomi down, both of them exhausted and shaking with adrenaline. His arm throbbed, and when he looked at it, he saw the bullet had carved a deep furrow across his bicep. "Let me see," Naomi said, and her hands were gentle as she examined the wound. "It needs to be cleaned and bandaged. So does your shoulder. I think you tore it open again." They took care of each other's wounds with the supplies from Thomas's saddlebag, working quickly and efficiently. The sun was fully up now, painting the world in gold and green. Somewhere in the distance, Thomas could still hear pursuit, though it sounded farther away. "Did you get the money?" he asked. Naomi held up the bag. $430 and my mother's locket. It was the only thing I could not leave behind. Then we keep moving. Hornbrook is still a full day's ride from here, maybe more. If we can get across the border into Oregon, we might have a chance. "Thomas, you shot a lawman for me. You could have run. Why did you not run?" He looked at her, this woman who had stumbled into his life and shattered his carefully maintained indifference. Her face was dirty and exhausted, her shoulder was bleeding through the bandage, and she had never looked more beautiful. "Because somewhere between finding you wounded in my room and planning this insane escape, you became my purpose," he said. "I have spent 10 years drifting without direction, telling myself I did not need anyone or anything. Then you showed up, and suddenly I had a reason to get up in the morning. I am not going back to purposeless days, Naomi, not now that I know what it feels like to have something worth fighting for." Tears welled in her eyes, but she smiled. "We are quite a pair, a murderer and an outlaw. A survivor and a man who finally found something to care about," Thomas corrected. "Now come on, we have a border to cross." They rode through the day, stopping only briefly to rest Rusty and stretch their aching muscles. The pursuit had faded, but Thomas knew Dalton would not give up. The sheriff had been embarrassed, One of his deputies had been shot, and his reputation was on the line. He would come after them with everything he had. But California was a big territory, and the border with Oregon was long and mostly unmarked. If they could just get far enough, fast enough, they might disappear into a new life. Hornbrook appeared in the late afternoon of the second day, a small settlement clustered around a creek crossing. It was not much, just a few buildings and a way station for travelers heading to Oregon or returning to California, but it represented the border, the line between the past and the future. They did not stop. Thomas kept Rusty moving north, crossing into Oregon as the sun set behind them, painting the sky in shades of red and orange. Only when they were a good 5 miles past the border did Thomas allow himself to believe they might actually make it. "Where do we go now?" Naomi asked. She was leaning against him, exhausted but still alert. "There is a town called Ashland, maybe another day's ride. Big enough to disappear in, small enough that nobody asks too many questions. We can rest there, figure out our next move. And then we find a place to start over. Maybe a small ranch somewhere quiet. You could teach like you wanted. I could work the land. We could build something, Naomi, something real." Together, Thomas turned his head to look at her, and what he saw in her eyes made his heart skip. "If you want that, I know I am not much. A drifter with a price on my head now, but I swear to you I will spend every day trying to build a life worthy of you. Thomas Quinn, you saved my life. You gave up everything to help me. You are more than enough." She reached up and touched his face, and Thomas felt the simple contact like electricity. "But I need to know this is not just about rescuing me, that you see me as more than some woman you felt sorry for." "I see you," Thomas said fiercely. "I see your strength, your intelligence, your courage. I see the way you refused to let Nathan break you, the way you fought for your own life. I see a woman who could have any man she wanted, and I know I am lucky you ended up in my room that morning." "Lucky," Naomi repeated, and then she laughed, the sound bright and genuine despite everything they had been through. "I broke into your room bleeding and desperate, and you call it lucky." "Best luck I ever had," Thomas said, and he meant it completely. They rode on as darkness fell, and Thomas allowed himself to hope. It was a fragile thing, hope. Easily broken, often disappointed. But it was also what separated living from merely existing, and Thomas had existed long enough. Ashland, Oregon was a mining town in transition, slowly becoming more civilized as the easy gold played out and families began to replace prospectors. It sat in a valley surrounded by mountains, with good water and fertile land. The kind of place where people could disappear if they wanted to, or build something permanent if they chose. Thomas and Naomi arrived in the morning, having spent their last night on the trail camped in a sheltered ravine. They were exhausted, dirty and wounded, but they had made it. 4 days of hard riding, constant fear, and determination had brought them across the border and into a new life. They found a small hotel on the edge of town, run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson, who asked no questions when Thomas paid for a week in advance. The room was simple but clean, with a real bed and a basin for washing. Naomi sat down heavily on the bed and immediately fell asleep, too tired to even remove her boots. Thomas stood watching her for a long moment, this woman who had changed everything, then carefully pulled off her boots and covered her with a blanket. His own exhaustion was a weight pressing down on him, but he forced himself to stay awake a little longer, sitting by the window and watching the street below for any sign of pursuit. None came. The town went about its business, unaware of the fugitives in their midst. When Thomas finally allowed himself to sleep, he dreamed of a small ranch with cattle grazing in green pastures, a garden where vegetables grew in neat rows, and a woman with dark hair and brown eyes who smiled at him like he was her whole world. He woke to find Naomi sitting beside the bed, watching him with an expression he could not quite read. "You talk in your sleep," she said softly. Thomas sat up, immediately alert. "What did I say? You said my name. And you said something about forever." She reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "Thomas, we need to talk about what happens next. Really talk about it. All right. I cannot keep running forever, and you should not have to. You gave up your life for me, but I do not want you to spend the rest of your days looking over your shoulder, always afraid of being caught. What are you suggesting?" "I am suggesting we build a real life here. We change our names, create new histories for ourselves. We get married, become respectable citizens. You find work, I find work. We become so ordinary and unremarkable that nobody ever thinks to look at us twice." "Married," Thomas repeated, his heart suddenly racing. "Unless you do not want that." "Unless I am assuming something that was not," Thomas kissed her. "It was not planned, not thought through." He just leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers, silencing her doubts with action instead of words. She made a small sound of surprise, then kissed him back, her good hand coming up to cup his face. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "I want that. I want all of it, you, a life together forever, but I need you to be sure. I am not Nathan. I will never hurt you, never try to control you, but I need you to choose this because you want it, not because you feel obligated or grateful." "I am terrified," Naomi admitted. "Terrified of trusting a man again, of making myself vulnerable, but I am more terrified of losing you. These past 2 weeks, you have shown me what a man should be. Kind, strong, selfless. You risked everything for a stranger, and you have never once asked for anything in return. That is not obligation, Thomas. That is love." "Love," Thomas said, testing the word. It had been so long since he had allowed himself to feel it that the concept seemed almost foreign. But looking at Naomi, he knew it was true. Somehow, impossibly, he had fallen in love with this wounded, fierce, extraordinary woman. "Is it too soon to say that?" Naomi asked, suddenly uncertain. "Not if it is true." "Then yes. I love you, Thomas Quinn. I think I started loving you the moment you chose to help me instead of turning me in, and I have been falling deeper every day since." Thomas kissed her again, slower this time, savoring it. Then he pulled back and looked at her seriously. "Then we do this right. We get married properly. You become Mrs." He paused. "We need new names." "I was thinking about that. What about Thomas Quinlan, close enough to Quinn that you will answer to it naturally, and I will be Naomi Thompson?" "Naomi Thompson," Thomas tried it out. "I like it." "And our story? We are from Sacramento. We met there, fell in love, decided to start fresh in Oregon. Simple, unverifiable, and boring enough that nobody will dig deeper." They spent the next few days establishing their new identities. Thomas found work at a lumber mill on the edge of town, hard physical labor that paid decent wages. Naomi recovered slowly, her shoulder healing cleaner now that they had access to proper medical care. She started tutoring some of the local children in reading and arithmetic, working out of their hotel room until they could afford better. 3 weeks after arriving in Ashland, Thomas Quinlan and Naomi Thompson were married by the local justice of the peace in a simple ceremony with Mrs. Patterson and her husband as witnesses. Naomi wore a simple blue dress Thomas had bought for her, and she carried wildflowers picked from the meadow behind the hotel. When the justice pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas felt something settle in his chest, some restless, wandering spirit finally coming home. Naomi looked at him with tears in her eyes and smiled, and Thomas knew he would spend the rest of his life trying to be worthy of that smile. Their wedding night was gentle and unhurried, both of them mindful of Naomi's still healing shoulder and the shadows of her past. Thomas let her set the pace, following her lead, making sure she felt safe and cherished. When she finally fell asleep in his arms, Thomas lay awake for a long time, marveling at how drastically his life had changed. 4 weeks ago, he had been a purposeless drifter, waiting for nothing and expecting less. Now he was a husband, a man with plans and hopes and a reason to build something lasting. "Thank you," he whispered to Naomi's sleeping form. "Thank you for breaking into my room. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for giving me a reason to be more than I was." She did not answer, lost in dreams, but Thomas felt the words needed to be said anyway. Summer turned to fall and fall to winter. Thomas and Naomi rented a small house on the outskirts of Ashland, a 2-room cabin with a stone fireplace and enough land for a garden. Thomas kept working at the mill, saving every spare dollar. Naomi's tutoring business grew as word spread about the educated woman from Sacramento who was so patient with difficult students. They were careful, always aware that someone might recognize them, that the past might catch up. But as months passed without incident, they began to relax, to believe that they might actually pull this off. In the spring of 1879, Naomi discovered she was pregnant. Thomas came home from the mill to find her sitting in the garden, her hands folded over her stomach and tears streaming down her face. For a moment his heart stopped, convinced something terrible had happened. "Naomi, what is wrong?" She looked up at him and he saw the tears were not from sadness but overwhelming emotion. "I am with child, about 3 months along, the doctor thinks." Thomas felt the world tilt sideways. A child, their child. The thought was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. "Are you all right?" "Is everything is fine, healthy. The doctor says I should carry to term without problems." She reached for his hand, pulling him down beside her. "Thomas, I am going to be a mother. We are going to be parents. How do you feel about that?" He asked carefully, knowing her marriage to Nathan must color everything. "I am scared. Terrified, honestly. I thought I would never have children, never wanted to bring a child into the world with Nathan. But this is different. This child is ours, Thomas, created from love, not violence. That makes all the difference." Thomas pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "I will be a good father, I swear it. I will never be like Nathan, never hurt you or this child. I will protect you both with everything I have." "I know," Naomi said, and the trust in her voice humbled him. "You have already proven what kind of man you are." The pregnancy progressed normally, and Thomas watched in awe as Naomi's body changed, as their child grew inside her. He became obsessively protective, making sure she did not work too hard, bringing her food she craved, reading to her in the evenings while she rested. The people of Ashland accepted them completely, the Quinlans who had come from Sacramento to start fresh. Nobody questioned their story. Nobody looked at them twice. They had succeeded in becoming ordinary, and ordinary had never felt so precious. In November of 1879, on a cold night when snow was just beginning to fall, Naomi went into labor. Thomas paced outside their bedroom while Mrs. Patterson and the midwife attended to her, his heart racing with every cry of pain he heard through the door. It took 8 hours, hours that felt like years, but finally Thomas heard a different sound. A baby's cry, strong and angry and alive. Mrs. Patterson opened the door, smiling. "You have a son, Thomas. A beautiful, healthy boy." Thomas entered the room on shaking legs to find Naomi propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him and smiled. "Come meet your son." Thomas approached carefully, as if the whole scene might shatter if he moved too quickly. When he looked down at the baby's face, red and wrinkled and absolutely perfect, he felt something break open in his chest. Love, pure and uncomplicated and overwhelming. What should we name him? Naomi asked softly. Daniel, Thomas said without hesitation, after my uncle, the man who built the cabin that saved us. Daniel Quinlan, Naomi tried it out. I like it. Daniel Thomas Quinlan. Thomas carefully took his son from Naomi's arms, cradling the tiny weight against his chest. Daniel opened his eyes, dark blue and unfocused, and yawned. It was the most mundane thing in the world, a baby yawning, but to Thomas, it felt like a miracle. Hello, Daniel, he whispered. I am your father. And I promise you, I will spend every day of my life making sure you grow up safe and loved. You will never know the kind of fear and pain your mother knew. You will never doubt that you are wanted and cherished. This I swear. The baby, obviously, did not respond. But Thomas felt the words settle into him like a vow, binding him to this new purpose even more completely than Naomi's appearance in his life had. Parenthood was terrifying and exhausting and wonderful. Thomas learned to change diapers and warm bottles and function on almost no sleep. Naomi recovered from the birth and threw herself into motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else. Daniel was a good baby, healthy and happy, and watching him grow became the focus of both their lives. The years passed. Daniel learned to walk and talk and cause mischief. Thomas saved enough to buy the small house they had been renting, then expanded it, adding a second bedroom and a proper kitchen. Naomi continued teaching, though she reduced her hours to spend more time with Daniel. In 1882, Naomi became pregnant again. This time, it was a girl, born in the spring with a shock of dark hair and her mother's brown eyes. They named her Grace. Thomas held his daughter for the first time and felt his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. 2 children. A wife he loved more every day. A house, a job, a life that meant something. All of it had started with a wounded woman breaking into his room and giving him a purpose. Life was not always easy. The mill had slow seasons and money was sometimes tight. Daniel got sick one winter with a fever that had Thomas praying to a God he was not sure he believed in. Naomi still sometimes woke from nightmares about Nathan, though they grew less frequent as the years passed. But they faced everything together, Thomas and Naomi. Partners in the truest sense, building a life brick by brick. In 1885, when Daniel was 6 and Grace was 3, a stranger came to Ashland asking questions about a couple from California. Thomas heard about it from a coworker and came home early, his heart in his throat. We might need to run, he told Naomi, already mentally preparing for flight. But the stranger, it turned out, was not a lawman or a bounty hunter. He was a lawyer from Sacramento, looking for Naomi on behalf of her late father's estate. Thomas and Naomi debated whether to reveal themselves, ultimately deciding the risk was too great. The stranger left after a week, having found no trace of Naomi Tucker, and life returned to normal. But the incident reminded them both that the past was never truly gone, just waiting in the shadows. Do you regret it? Thomas asked Naomi one night after the children were asleep. Running, hiding, becoming someone else, not for a moment, Naomi said firmly. This life, this family, it is worth any risk. I would do it all again. Even shooting Nathan, especially that. He does not haunt me anymore, Thomas. You replaced him. Every kind word, every gentle touch, every day you show our children how a man should be, you erase him a little more. I am not his victim anymore. I am your wife, Daniel and Grace's mother. That is who I am now. Thomas pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. I love you. I do not say it enough, but I do. You saved me as much as I saved you. We saved each other, Naomi corrected. "And we will keep saving each other every day for the rest of our lives." The children grew. Daniel showed an aptitude for mathematics and building things with his hands. Grace was quiet and thoughtful, preferring books to dolls. Thomas taught Daniel to ride and hunt and fish. Naomi taught Grace to read and write and think for herself. In 1888, Ashland got its first real school, and Naomi was hired as one of the teachers. She loved the work, loved shaping young minds, loved being part of the community in an official capacity. Thomas had worked his way up to foreman at the mill, overseeing operations and managing men. They were respectable now. The Quinlans, pillars of the community, known for their hard work and their well-behaved children. Nobody remembered the fugitives who had arrived a decade earlier, exhausted and wounded and desperate. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Thomas surprised Naomi with a picnic by the creek where they used to walk when they first arrived in Ashland. The children were with Mrs. Patterson for the afternoon, giving them rare time alone. 10 years, Naomi marveled, lying on the blanket beside Thomas and watching clouds drift across the sky. "It feels like yesterday and forever ago at the same time. Do you remember what you said to me that first morning? In my room in Eureka, I asked you not to turn me in. Before that, you said they will hang me, and I remember thinking I should not care, that it was not my problem, but I could not stop caring. Even then, before I knew you, something in me recognized something in you." Naomi rolled onto her side to look at him. "What did you recognize?" "Loneliness. Exhaustion with a life that was not working. A desire for something better, even if you could not name what that something was. We were both so lost, Naomi, and somehow we found each other. You gave me a life worth living," Naomi said softly. "Before you, I was just surviving, enduring. Now I actually look forward to each day. That is your gift to me." "And you gave me purpose," Thomas replied. "I spent so long drifting, telling myself it did not matter, that I did not matter. Then you appeared, and suddenly everything mattered. You still wake beside me every morning, and every morning I remember why I exist. You are my purpose, Naomi. You and our children and this life we built together." She kissed him, slow and sweet, a kiss that held 10 years of love and partnership and shared struggle. When they finally broke apart, both smiling, Thomas felt profoundly grateful for that morning in June of 1878 when he had opened his eyes to find his purpose bleeding in the corner of his room. More years passed. Daniel turned 16 and began apprenticing at the mill with his father. Grace showed an interest in teaching like her mother. In 1894, Thomas and Naomi became grandparents when Daniel married a local girl named Sarah, and they had a son, whom they named Thomas after his grandfather. Holding his grandson for the first time, watching Daniel cradle the baby with the same careful wonder Thomas remembered feeling with his own children, Thomas felt the circle complete itself. From purposeless drifter to husband, father, grandfather. From a man who expected nothing from his mornings to a man whose mornings were full of love and family and meaning. "What are you thinking?" Naomi asked, coming to stand beside him as he held young Thomas. "That I am grateful for every choice that led me to that morning when I found you. For every moment since, for all of it. Even the hard parts, especially those. The hard parts are what made this," he gestured to their children, their grandchild, the house they had built together, "possible. Pain and struggle and fear, they were the price of admission to this life. And I would pay it 10 times over." Grace married a few years later, a young lawyer who treated her with the respect and kindness she deserved. They moved to Portland but visited often, and Naomi cried happy tears every time they left, already counting the days until their next visit. Thomas retired from the mill in 1898 at the age of 52. his body worn from decades of hard labor, but his spirit stronger than it had ever been. He spent his days working in the garden, playing with his grandchildren when they visited, and sitting on the porch with Naomi in the evenings, watching the sun set behind the mountains. One evening in the summer of 1900, sitting on that porch with Naomi's hand in his, Thomas said, "Do you remember how many times I told you I did not believe in purpose, that I thought wanting things was foolish? I remember. You were very committed to being cynical. I was an idiot." Naomi laughed, the sound still as beautiful to him at 46 as it had been at 24. "You were lost. There is a difference. Maybe, but I was wrong about purpose. It is not something you find waiting for you. It is something that happens when you stop hiding from life and start participating in it, when you let yourself care about someone other than yourself." Is this going to turn into a philosophical lecture? Because I was enjoying the quiet. Thomas squeezed her hand. "I am trying to say thank you for breaking into my room, for trusting me, for giving me a reason to be more than I thought I could be. Every morning when I wake up beside you, I remember that I am not alone, not drifting, not purposeless. I am Thomas Quinlan, and I am loved, and I matter because you decided I was worth loving." "Thomas Quinlan," Naomi said, turning to look at him directly. "You always mattered. You just needed someone to show you, and yes, I gave you that. But you gave it back to me 1,000-fold. You showed me that marriage could be partnership, that men could be kind, that I deserved to be treated with respect and love. We made each other better. That is what real love does." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun continued its descent, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Somewhere in the house behind them, they could hear the sounds of family, Daniel and Sarah having come for dinner with the grandchildren. Normal sounds of a normal life, exactly what they had fought so hard to build. "You ever wonder what happened?" Naomi asked suddenly. "Back in Eureka after we left, did they keep looking for us? Does Sheriff Dalton still have wanted posters with our faces? Sometimes. But not as much as I used to. That life feels like it belonged to different people. Thomas Quinn the drifter and Naomi Tucker the desperate fugitive, they are not who we are anymore." "No," Naomi agreed. "We are so much more now." In 1902, Daniel and Sarah gave Thomas and Naomi their third grandchild, a girl named Naomi after her grandmother. Watching his son hold his daughter, seeing the love and protectiveness in Daniel's face, Thomas felt profound satisfaction. His children had never known violence or fear in their home. They had grown up secure and loved, and now they were passing that gift to their own children, breaking the cycle. That was what Naomi called it. Taking the pain of the past and transforming it into a different future. It was her greatest pride, she said, that Daniel and Grace had no nightmares, no scars, no reasons to flinch. The years accumulated, each one adding to the weight and richness of their shared life. Birthdays and holidays, graduations and weddings, births and eventually deaths. Mrs. Patterson passed in 1905, and both Thomas and Naomi cried at her funeral, remembering how she had helped them when they first arrived in Ashland, asking no questions and offering only kindness. Thomas's health began to decline in his early 60s, nothing dramatic, just the accumulated wear of a hard life. His back troubled him, and his hands sometimes shook. But Naomi was always there, adapting, helping, never making him feel diminished or weak. "We are growing old together," she observed one morning, looking at their reflections in the mirror. Both of them had gray hair now, lines etched deep around their eyes and mouths. "I always hoped we would." "Disappointed?" Thomas asked, only half joking, not even slightly. "You are still the most handsome man I have ever seen, even with that beard going white." And you are still the woman I fell in love with, even with those new spectacles." They smiled at each other in the mirror. Two people who had found each other in the worst circumstances and built the best life. In the spring of 1912, Thomas and Naomi celebrated their 31st wedding anniversary. Their children and grandchildren gathered for a party, filling the house with noise and laughter and love. Looking around at all of it, Thomas felt overwhelmed by the sheer improbability of it all. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, Thomas and Naomi lay in bed together, her head on his shoulder like she had done for 3 decades. "I need to tell you something," Thomas said quietly. "That sounds ominous." "Not ominous, just important." He took a breath. "I know I am getting older, that I will not be here forever. And I need you to know that every single day of these last 34 years has been a gift. You gave me a life I did not know was possible. You gave me purpose when I had resigned myself to meaninglessness. And when my time comes, I will go grateful because I got to spend these years with you." "Thomas, let me finish. If I go first, I need you to promise me you will keep living. Really living, not just existing. Find joy, spend time with our children and grandchildren, keep teaching if you can. Do not waste time mourning me when you could be celebrating the life we built." Naomi was crying now, quiet tears slipping down her cheeks. "And if I go first, then I will do the same. Because that is what you would want, and I have spent 34 years trying to give you what you want. I want you to live forever. So do I. But since that is not possible, I will settle for growing as old as I can manage, waking up beside you every morning until I cannot anymore and hoping that is enough." "It is more than enough," Naomi whispered. "It is everything." Thomas lived another 8 years after that conversation. Years filled with more grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren. He taught young Thomas how to build furniture, passed down his tools and his knowledge. He walked Grace down the aisle when she renewed her vows with her husband on their 15th anniversary. He sat on the porch every evening with Naomi and watched the sun set, never taking a single moment for granted. In the fall of 1920, at the age of 74, Thomas Quinn, known to the world as Thomas Quinlan, died peacefully in his sleep with Naomi's hand in his. His last words, spoken just before he closed his eyes for the final time, were, "Thank you for giving me a purpose." Naomi lived another 6 years, teaching until she physically could not stand at a chalkboard anymore, spending time with her family, keeping Thomas's memory alive through stories and love. She never remarried, never even considered it. Her heart had chosen Thomas Quinn that morning in 1878, when he could have turned her in but chose to help instead. And her heart remained loyal even after death. When Naomi Thompson Quinlan died in 1926 at the age of 72, she was surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Her last words were quieter, meant only for herself and whatever came next. "I am coming, Thomas. Wait for me." They were buried side by side in the Ashland Cemetery, their headstones simple but eloquent. Thomas Quinlan, 1846. 1920. Beloved husband, father, and grandfather, he found his purpose. Naomi Quinlan, 1854-1926. Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, she woke beside him daily. The epitaphs told only a fraction of their story, but perhaps that was appropriate. The full truth, the flight and the fear and the desperate gamble that had brought them together, that remained hidden. What mattered was what they had built from those beginnings, a life so full of love and purpose that it echoed through generations. Their great-grandson, another Daniel, stood at their graves many years later with his own children and told them the story as he knew it. Great-great-grandpa Thomas was a cowboy who helped great-great-grandma Naomi when she needed it most. They fell in love and built this family, and everything we are comes from the choice they made to help each other. It was not the complete truth, but it was true enough. Two people finding each other in the darkness and creating light. A man who had expected mornings without purpose, until purpose woke beside him daily. A woman who had been told she was worthless until a man showed her she was everything. Together, they had taken their broken pieces and made something whole. And that, in the end, was the only story that mattered.